All right, I want to welcome everybody for joining, and we are really glad that you are here. It's great to bring so many people together and just talk about this great topic of asking better questions. My name is Dustin Leatherman, and I'm the Director of Coaching Experience at Kairos Partnerships. I'm guessing many of you know at least a little bit about Kairos Partnerships, but just in case it's your first interaction, we exist to help leaders overcome their unique challenges by equipping them to lead with clarity, confidence, and consistency. So essentially, our goal is to add as much value to leaders as we possibly can, and that's why we're here today. So I'll share some ways that you can get connected with us at the end. But this is our first webinar, so we're really excited about that. We would love for your feedback afterwards if you want to tell us how we can improve, get better, because this is something we would love to offer throughout the year. As you're logging in, we would love if you would just put your name and where you're from in the chat box. If you also want to add why you registered and what you hope to get out of it, that would be great as well. We do have people joining from all over the place today, which is really exciting. And we wanted to give a special shout out to the Taylor University Master's Program that is joining us, and all of our friends from Vancouver, Washington, who are joining as part of a church there. We do have everybody muted and would encourage you to stay muted for the duration of the webinar, but we would love if you would put your cameras on just so we can see faces and interact a little bit in that way. Last thing, you can utilize the chat function, which gives you a place to add questions. We will do a short question and answer with JR at the end. So if you have a question there, just throw that in there and we will read a few of them as we close our time. I know for many of you, JR Briggs needs no introduction, but JR is an author, a coach, a teacher, a speaker, husband, father, and a leader of leaders. JR has been my coach for a long time. I've had the privilege to journey with him for 12 plus years. And I've just seen firsthand that he is somebody that loves to invest in people. And again, that's why we're here today. So without anything else, I'm going to turn that over to JR.
Well, thanks, Dustin, and it's good to be with you all. I love this topic, and I am so excited to jump into this webinar. I'm encouraged. We expected maybe a few dozen people to sign up. We did not anticipate over 200 and almost 230 registrations for this. So we're really grateful for the opportunity, and we hope for the next 60 minutes, this will be an incredible way we can add value to you. We've worked really hard to be focused and equipped and prepared so we can get you the value that you need. So I'm going to be sharing a couple slides along the way. And this is something that we wanted to do for a long time, as Dustin said, and we hope that there can be future times as well. I want to encourage you, like Dustin said, to have your camera on for our learning and our attention, but also for the sake of other people as well. If you're driving or you can't, we understand. But we want to encourage you to have that on if that's at all possible. I want to cover some important elements of questions, but I also want to interact like Dustin said. We want to make sure there's a Q&A time. So if you look at the bottom, you see on the Zoom feature there, the Q&A. If you've got a question, feel free to pop it there. Questions about questions, anything that I'm covering, you want us to unpack further, please do that there. But let's jump in right away. I want to start by telling you a story. On a warm summer Friday night, there were friends that were gathered on the back patio of a Capitol Hill home in Washington, D.C., and they were gathering for steaks and jumbo shrimp and drinking good wine. And a hooded intruder slid through an open gate and approached a 14-year-old girl and put a gun to her head. He said, "Give me your money or I'll shoot." The five other guests there, including the girl's parents, froze. And amid the terror, one of the women there was Christina Rowan. And she blurted out the first thing that came to her mind. She said, "We're just finishing dinner. Why don't you have a glass of wine with us?" Which is probably not the first thing that pops into most people's minds. The intruder pulled the gun slowly off the girl's head and picked up a glass and took a sip. And he said, "Damn, that's good wine." The girl's father encouraged the intruder to take the whole glass. In fact, he said, "Take the whole bottle." And the intruder pulled his hood down, took another sip, as well as a bite of the gourmet cheese on the table. And then, tucking his handgun into the pocket of his sweatpants, he looked around on the patio and he said, I think I may have come to the wrong house tonight. I'm sorry. And then he asked the question and said, Can I get a hug? Christina Rowan stood up and wrapped her arms around the intruder, and one by one, the four other guests stood up and embraced him. That's really good wine, he said as he took another sip. And then he had one final request. He said, Can we have a group hug? And the five adults surrounded and embraced him. And then the man walked out with the crystal wine glass in hand, filled with more wine. No one was hurt and nothing was stolen. In fact, in the alley behind the home, investigators later found the intruder's empty crystal wine glass on the ground, completely unbroken. I'm reminded about the power of questions and that questions can change and alter people's lives. It can even save lives too. So I want you to reflect for a moment in your own life. I want you to think about these questions here. What's the best, what are the best questions that you've been asked by other people before? And it could be last week or 15 years ago. And what are some of the best questions you've asked others? And feel free to put these in the chat box if you want. And then I want to ask you this question. What's the difference between a good question and a great one? I also want you to consider this additional question as well. Who do you know who consistently asks great questions? What do they do or not do to get to that point that they're great question askers? How has their ability to ask better questions enhanced your life? I ask these questions because I want you to think about it. And ultimately, I want to equip you to get to the point where you can say, or other people can say about you, you know what? They ask great questions because you can cultivate that in your life. Like I said, this time together is going to go very, very quickly. And there's so much we could explore and unpack about questions. We have less than an hour to do it, but I hope to give you a delicious sampling of what a full course meal could look like here. So to be clear, this is not a webinar where I give you a long list of great questions. I want to do better than that. I want to give you the tools that you can learn to ask better questions. Instead of giving you a fish that will last for a day, I want to teach you how to fish, which you can use for the rest of your lifetime. Now, I am going on the assumption that you as a leader know that questions are important, right? If I ask you, raise your hand if you've ever been asked a question. I sense that you already know that questions are important. However, few leaders have been trained on how to ask better questions. I'll just give this to you right now. The basis of the entire thing is this: the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask of God, yourself, and others. This is a conviction that I hold very tightly. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions you ask God, yourself, and others. And so, because of this, this is why this topic is so crucial. This is why I've been studying this for years. This is why I've spent 10 years in active study. I wrote my D-Min dissertation on how to equip leaders to ask better questions. And I just wrapped up a book that will be releasing here in a few months with InterVarsity Press on this idea of equipping leaders like you to ask better questions. So let me start with this very simple question. What is a question? In its simplest form, a question is communication that desires a response, right? Makes sense. It is the salt of communication. It seasons everyday interactions and conversations that we have. I want you to think for a moment how different the world would be if language was composed only of declarative statements, commands, and assertions. How different would your relationships be? How different would your learning and your education be if there were no questions whatsoever? Heather Holloman, who's a professor at Penn State University, told me when I talked to her last summer, when I asked her, what is the purpose of a question? She said very clearly, it's for clarity and engagement. Clarity and engagement. Now, we could go way down the rabbit hole on this. Terry Fadum, in my research, Terry Fadum said that there are 27 different kinds of questions someone can ask. It could be rhetorical, it could be abrasive, it could be informative, but there are lots of different types of questions that we could categorize. No questions, there's a lot of metaphors we could think of. So think of these pictures, word pictures of the power of a question. They're like keys on a key ring that are capable of unlocking doors. They're windows in which we can look through and see each other. They're mirrors which we hold up to better see ourselves. They're like archaeologist tools excavating hidden treasures that are lying beneath the surface. Questions are sometimes like flashlights shining a light on where to go next. They can be like screwdrivers that pop open a lid like the lid of a can of paint. Questions are like the neck muscles that move the head to help us focus on certain things and turn away from other things. The philosopher Socrates actually called questions two things. He said they were like gadflies that would like sting a horse to irritate and get them to move, and they're like midwives to help give birth to something new. I love those two images, gadflies and midwives. But there's so much power in questions, right? They are the glue of relationships. They open up new possibilities. They are the bread and butter of innovation and creativity. They can bring healing. They also can bring wounds too. But I want you to think about this. This was fascinating in my research. Neurologically, a question does something to our brains. It's called instinctive elaboration. The idea that when someone asks you a question, it actually neurologically takes over your thought process, rendering you incapable of thinking of anything else. In fact, some researchers describe this idea when someone asks you a question, even if momentarily, it actually has the ability to hijack your brain. If you don't believe me, what color are the shoes that you're wearing right now? Now, whether you knew it or not, I just hijacked your brain and you started thinking about your shoes in a way you didn't 10 seconds ago. People who ask frequent questions, even in the research that's been found, are more popular among their peers, are often seen as leaders. They have more social influence and are sought out more frequently for friendship and advice. People who ask more questions, they actually navigate crucial conversations more effectively. They handle conflict more productively, and they lead to more effective reading comprehension. These are not opinions. This is research that has been found what happens when people ask questions regularly. This is the power and the potential that all of us have to ask questions. You have that opportunity as well. But while they can cause great blessing, as I mentioned earlier, they can also cause deep wounds on others as well. So let's look for a second here at some of the possibilities. What are the possibilities if we are to learn to ask better questions? Well, I've listed some already, but they can create connections. They can solve problems. They can deepen relational intimacy. In fact, I would argue you don't have a single close friend where you haven't also asked really important questions of each other. They birth innovation and creativity, as I mentioned, and they're used to make a point or to spur an action or a creative thought. Think about a really good rhetorical question that someone has used in your life. They're making a point, right? And they could have made a point with a period or an exclamation point, but they asked a question because they know it would hijack your brain and it would help you think in a new way. Those are all good things, but there are some cultural barriers that exist. And when it comes to questions, we need to name these barriers that keep us from asking great questions. What are some of those barriers? I can think of nine. There may be more than that. There probably are, but here are nine primary barriers or misunderstandings that happen. The first one is the barriers that we live in an attention-seeking age. And because of that, people are always saying, me, me, me. If I ask a question, I'm turning the spotlight off of me and onto someone else. You've maybe heard the adage, enough about me. What do you think about me? Right? We live in this attention seeking age. And so this is a barrier. We've got to learn to have our arrows pointing out in a world where everybody else has their arrows pointing in. Questions focus on other people. That's why people feel valued when you ask a really careful, thoughtful, intentional question. The second thing is that our own hubris, we often already assume that we know the answer. And if we know the answer, why would we ask someone else the question? The third is that it's perceived, there's a strong perception that it's inefficient and unhelpful, right? We're making these decisions, and all of a sudden ask a question, and we go, "Ah, you're slowing the progress down. We were just about to get to make a decision, and then you threw in another question." The fourth barrier is it's not modeled well. How do we know how to do this well if it's not modeled well by others? So we just don't have a lot of good examples. Sometimes when I ask the question, who do you know, or what leader do you know who asks great questions, people go, I don't know. A lot of the good leaders I can think of are really good answer givers. They're not great question askers. And so we just don't have many good models. The fifth thing is that oftentimes, if we're really being honest, we really don't care to know what other people think. They say, if I don't really care, why would I ask? And so we've got to ask what's our motive on that. Sometimes we're afraid of awkward interactions, or maybe even afraid of what we might learn. I know there have been seasons in my own life where I've had enough courage and insight to realize I think I'm afraid to ask because I think I know the answer, and I don't know if I'm going to like that answer. And that just needs to be named. Sometimes we assume people don't want to be asked. There are times, of course, where people don't want to be asked the question. But I think we assume that too often. There are times where I've heard from leaders going, you know what? I just wish someone would ask me a question of what I think. That'd really be meaningful to me. Um, and this is the big one. Then number eight is this is the big one. We fear it may make us look unintelligent and uninformed, right? We all know that. Like, if I ask a question, people are going to think I'm stupid, right? And sort of the adage is there's no stupid questions, just stupid people who ask them, right? And unfortunately, that has been reinforced over and over again. And I'm here to say to you, if we can have enough courage to get over that perception and ask questions, it's amazing the gift we can give to other people. And lastly, number nine, the barriers that exist. It can be hard work and it requires a lot of deliberate practice. And that's what I'm hoping to convince you to say, yes, it is a lot of work, but it's worth it because the power and the potential to ask great questions is even better. So we need to ask this question. What is required for us to ask great questions? I'll say this, some of it is skill, right? And we need to practice that. But I have found that we must value it first. It doesn't matter how many skills you have about asking good questions. If you don't actually care to ask better questions, if you don't care about the people you're asking the questions to, if you don't have a curious posture, this is going to be very difficult. And if you don't genuinely care about this stuff, it's going to feel robotic and worse off. People will sense from you that this is contrived or that you have some sort of ulterior motive, and nobody wants that. So, what is the posture? What is required? Here are the four components I found. If you could break it down to their least common denominator, there are four components of great questions. The first one is curiosity. You cannot ask good questions if you aren't genuinely curious, if you don't have a teachable, learnable spirit to you. The second thing is humility. It's hard to be arrogant and want to ask a lot of good questions. And so we have, curiosity and humility go hand in hand. We've got to just have the humility to say, I don't even know what I don't know, or I don't know as much as you know. I'm certain of that. And I want to learn from you. And then with that, that takes a lot of courage to say my identity is not wrapped up into how people perceive how smart or intelligent that I am. And so because of that, I've got to have the courage to ask it. And then lastly, just because I have curiosity, humility, and courage doesn't mean I have wisdom. I can ask some foolish questions. And so we need all four of these working together. The problem with this is there's a term that I heard from Charles Derber. He's a sociologist at Boston College. And many years ago, he coined a term that many people fall into when they don't want to ask good questions. And he called it conversational narcissism. Ooh, I remember hearing that term and going, wow, yikes. And one of the things that he found in his research was this difference between a shift response and a support response. I want to spend some time on this because this is really crucial. Once you hear the difference between shift response and support response, which happens every day in common conversations, once you learn it and once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. It's like the FedEx arrow. When I learned this from Charles Derber, was so important. It has shifted my mindset and has really helped me understand how relationships are deepened on this. So he interviewed hundreds of people and followed their conversations, and he noticed that there was a shift response or a support response that happened. Let me explain the difference here because this is really good. A shift response is where two people are talking, someone shares, and they shift the respondent shifts attention away from the speaker and towards themselves, towards the person talking. And this has a kind of a competitive interaction to it. This is common among conversational narcissists, those who squelch any further opportunity for mutual connection. They divert the attention away from the other person and right back onto themselves. It's like stealing the ball from someone else while they're dribbling. The approach stunts any opportunity for deeper connection. This competitive interaction, I've got something to say, and what I'm going to say is more interesting than what you're saying. David Brooks talks about this, New York Times um, columnist and author of many great books. He called these people conversation toppers. Those who are always trying to top the stories or be more interesting than what others have shared. And few things kill the flow of conversation and interaction and deepen connection more than topping. Some people call this boomer asking. Maybe you've heard this term. Boomer asking is where I say, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" And you're about to respond, and immediately I say, "Well, here's what I'm doing. We're going here, and we're doing this, and we're going camping, and we're excited." And the person goes, "Oh, you didn't really want to know my answer. You were just asking it so you could set the stage for you to respond and tell me what you're doing." That's called boomer asking. Now, that's a shift response. Let's look at a support response because this is the juice of relationships. This is where it gets really healthy. A support response is the opposite. It keeps the attention focused on the speaker and what they're saying, and my spotlight is focused on them. I don't redirect it on me like with the shift response. Support is I'm supporting what's being said, and instead of competitive, this is a cooperative interaction. It's instead of walking in a room to announce, "Here I am," which is the shift response posture. Instead, they look at you and say, "There you are." That's the support response posture. And it's an attention giving posture rather than me trying to take it and grab it for myself. Now, let me give you an example. Okay. Notice the difference here. Now, John, says, "Oh, my dog got out last week and it took 3 days to find him." And Mary says, "Our dog is always digging up the fence, so we can't let him out unless he's on a leash." You see the shift response? It went away from John's dog and what happened last week to this is what we do with our dog, as opposed to a support response says, "Oh no, where did you finally find your dog?" See, the question remains as a support response there on that. Another example is this. "I watched this really great documentary about turtles last night." A shift response is where Bob might say, "You know what? I'm not really big on documentaries. I'm more of an action film kind of guy. I turn it away from you and I turn it right back on me." As opposed to keeping it on Sue and saying, "Turtles? Hmm, how did you happen to see that? Are you into turtles? When did you become interested in turtles?" That's a support response. That simple thing, you begin to notice that, friends, you're going to begin to see the difference of relationships, of competition versus cooperation, being collaborative in that. And once you hear it, like I said, you're not going to be able to unhear it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. I'll give you an example of this. There was an American socialite, Jenny Jerome. She's also known as Lady Randolph Churchill. This was Winston Churchill's mother. And she recounted the time in her journal where she dined with the British politician Benjamin Disraeli. And then later on a separate occasion, with Disraeli's political rival, William Gladstone. And this is what she wrote. She said, when I left the dining room after sitting with Gladstone, I thought he was the cleverest man in England. But when I sat next to Disraeli, I felt leaving I was the cleverest woman in all of England. Of course, Lady Randolph Churchill preferred to spend time with Disraeli. I mean, who wouldn't? While the two-time prime minister was the master orator, he was also an attentive listener who steered conversation away from himself and kept it focused on the other person. As the adage goes, People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And in a world full of Gladstones, it's much better to be like Disraeli. All right. Hopefully that's been helpful for you as you think about this. I guarantee you, if you have this as your focus, you'll notice, oh, there's a shift response. Oh, there's a support response. But let's talk about the four levels of questions. This is what many of you have said has been helpful for you, and something that's really important to have a mental model or a framework by which you think about the questions that you hear, that you receive, and also that you ask. Now, we need wisdom when we think about these four levels and to know when to move from one level to the next, right? So here's the important truth, and you see this on the screen. Not all questions are created equal. You've probably felt that, but I just want to name that right now. So if questions are not created equal, how are they broken down? In my research, I developed that very simply that there are four different levels of questions. The first level is this. It's just level one is just questions for information. You could call that pure facts. You could ask anybody this, right? What's your name? You could go up to a stranger and just say, "Excuse me, what time is it?" Or you go up to someone in the grocery store, "What aisle would I find a salad dressing?" It's not awkward because it's just simple facts, right? It's not awkward. You could ask anybody that. All right. But level two question takes it to a little bit of greater depth. Level two are questions for interactions that require some thoughts and emotions that need to be shared on the part of the person that's being asked. So there needs to be at least some relational context when you ask a level two question. So level two might be, so how have you been doing lately? Or when did you first become interested in pickleball? You wouldn't just randomly walk up to a stranger right away and your first interaction is, "Hey, do you like pickleball? When did you first get interested?" They might be like a little suspicious. "Who are you? Why are you asking me this? What do you want from me?" And it's because we need to start with level one questions when we first meet people. But if we want to go even deeper than that, level three questions are questions that are for understanding and perceiving and connecting. This is more about feelings and desires. This is done with people that you know pretty well, right? There's some context of trust that already exists. So, some examples would be you might ask someone, a dear friend, "What do you want? What do you really want in your life? Or what do you want in this situation? Or tell me, what are you absolutely passionate about? Or what are you feeling about our team's chances of winning this weekend?" Right? Give me your feelings and your desires. Or what would you do if you were not afraid of failing? That's one of my favorite questions. I love asking that. What would you do if you were not afraid of failing? Again, you're not going to ask these of strangers. You're going to ask these of people that you have some context with and some level of trust because it requires some vulnerability on their part to share with you. But then that leaves us to level four. Level four are what I call questions for transformation. This is where vulnerability and intimacy are absolutely required. And you need to have real, intimate, long-standing trust with someone to be able to ask a level four question without it being awkward. This could be a spouse. This could be a best friend, maybe a counselor or a pastor or an accountability partner. But there is just a small circle of people in your life where you can ask level four questions and be asked, and it's not awkward. So, for example, when do you feel most fully loved? Or what is it like on your darkest days? There's somebody I know who really struggles with depression, and so I asked him, "What is it like for you on your darkest days?" Now, because I have a good relationship with him, I'm able to ask him that, and he was able to share. But it requires courage and trust on his part to me to be able to answer that question and it not feel awkward to receive that. Or what is it that you are afraid to tell me in this moment? Ooh, I mean, that is as level four as it gets. As you think about these four levels, I want you to think about it. Maybe a way to describe it would be entering into a lake, right? So level one would be kind of up to your shins. Level two questions, you're kind of wading out a little bit further, will be up to your waist. Level three would be feeling like it's up to your chest, but you can still touch the bottom. You can still feel, you can feel the waves and the temperature, and but it's up to your chest. You're still touching the bottom. Level four is where you're swimming out so far you can no longer touch the bottom. It's Have you ever felt like someone asked you a question and you thought, "Oh, that's awkward," or "That's too personal. I don't want to answer that." It's because someone didn't have the wisdom or the discernment to realize that they had just jumped levels, or that there wasn't enough trust at one level to move to the second level. And you got to move in these levels. Uh, Trust has to be extended. There are some extenuating circumstances, maybe in an emergency, an EMT asking a very personal question to try to help you in an emergency medical situation. But in most cases of healthy relationships, there's a process of level one, two, three, and four. Of course, the goal isn't to be in relationship with everybody to level four. Not everyone's going to be there. Another way to look at it is maybe like a target, right? Anybody can be on the outer ring, and the closer you get in, the less people are in there, but the more meaningful the trust and the conversation can be with them. So we need wisdom to know when is there enough trust to be able to move to the next level. And we need courage then when we're on the verge of one level, saying, I think there's enough trust to go there, to be vulnerable enough and safe enough to ask that or be asked that by someone else. So hopefully that's been really helpful for you. I want to encourage you, take 30 seconds right now, and you can put it in the chat box if you want. You can write it in your journal. You can write it in a Word doc or a Google Doc if you want for your own notes. I want you to think if you can identify some level one, two, three, and four questions that you've asked or that you could ask. Maybe think back in the last day or the last week or the last month. What have been some questions in each of the four levels? Maybe you reflect back on the last week as you think about people in your team or your family or your organization or your church or with your staff. What kind of questions were asked in there? Now, I know not everyone on here is a person of faith. I'm a person of deep faith, and um, that informs everything that I do in my life in leadership. And so, one of the things that I've done, which is a really fun practice, is to actually look at the questions that Jesus asked. He was a fascinating, brilliant question asker that led to a lot of life change. His questions did. I want to see if I could challenge you to actually reflect upon, think about, or even study the questions of Jesus and ask, now, which level of question was it that Jesus asked? And by the way, Jesus asked all four levels of questions recorded in the four Gospels in the New Testament. That's a fun exercise to just be a little bit more aware of the four questions, the four levels of questions. All right. Here's what I'd like to do. And again, there's so much more that I could share, but I do want to leave some time for us to think about and to talk about um, the questions or that you might have about questions. So again, you can put that in the chat box in the Q&A feature at the bottom, and we'll make sure we answer as many of those as time allows here within the hour. But I want to give you some ridiculously practical ways in which you can improve your question asking immediately. As in, you can start doing this as soon as we log off this call. There are some really practical ways you can do that. I'm going to give you three in three different categories. So a total of nine. Let me encourage you, don't try to do all nine. I want to encourage you just to pick a few that might be helpful for you. So take it like you'd eat seafood. You eat the meat, you throw out the bones. You get to decide what's meat and bones. My only advice is don't choke on the bones. But I'm going to give you three in each category. We're going to look at before, during, and after conversations where you might be asking questions. All right. So let's look at the before. The before time when you might be preparing to ask questions or to ask better questions. And the first one, very simple. It's this. When you hear a good question, write it down. Build a list. I've got a notebook here that I carry with me everywhere I go. It's in my bag, it's on my desk. And on the back is a list of good questions in this season that I'm thinking through. And so those questions have been incredibly helpful for me to just say, man, either I heard it on the radio, on a podcast, overheard it in line at the post office, I read it online, whatever, write it down. Write it down. Build a list that you can have. I think the biggest struggle that people have is I'm not good at asking questions. How can I come up with good questions? Here's the thing, you don't have to invent them all, but your radar should be up so that you can come up with good questions on your own. So steal them, borrow them, give appropriate credit. But I'm all the time going, ooh, that's a good question. I read one last week in a book and went, ooh, and I stopped right on the airplane, right then, paused it, opened my journal, and wrote it down. That's a question that I want to be asking regularly. So when you hear a good question, you read a good question, write it down. You may want to keep an actual separate questions journal, or maybe there's a notes section on your iPhone that you just say, good questions. And then just when you hear one, just write it down. Just see that list build. Just being aware can be a great start. And as you write them down, let me challenge you with this. See if you can identify which level it's on. That would be really good. The second is this: go into every meeting or interaction that you have and prepare 3 questions you could potentially ask. It could be driving on the way, or 30 seconds before you log on to Zoom, or right before you walk in the conference room with your team. Always come into a meeting prepared. By the way, you may not even get to ask those questions. That doesn't mean it's a waste. You're still stretching and growing that muscle, that question asking muscle that you have. So even if you don't ask them, it's okay. Or even if you ask just one, that's okay. But I want to encourage you to not go into any interaction or any meeting without thinking through 3 questions that you can potentially ask. And then the last one in the preparation is see if you can develop 5 to 10 high quality questions that you can access easily. I call these the back pocket questions. Ones that you can just have either in your literal or figurative back pocket to bring them out. Not sure what to say. You're at a party, you meet somebody new, you've run out of things to say. Oh, and I try to just memorize 5 to 10 that I can pull up at any time. Some of my favorite ones have been this: what's the best book or podcast that you've read or listened to in the past 6 months? In other words, what have you found interesting? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, how does your job rate on your passion meter? I always love hearing that. If people say, it's like a 4 out of 10, then I like to ask the follow up: what would it take for that to move from a 4 to a 7 out of 10? What would have to happen in your job? And so those are just some questions I have in my back pocket. But see if you can memorize or have handy 5 to 10 great questions. So that's before in your preparation. But when you're in a conversation, when you're participating in a conversation in real time, I want to encourage you to think through this. Be aware of the shift response and the support response. Be aware and check yourself of just going, ooh, did I just take the spotlight off of them and turn it on myself? Or how can I ask a question that keeps it on them? And also be aware of the 4 levels of questions and say, ooh, I think there's enough trust with this person. Maybe I can move from level 1 to level 2. Or maybe I have a great relationship with this person and they're struggling. We've been level 3 question friends. Maybe I can actually press in carefully and discerningly and appropriately to ask a level 4 question. All right. The other thing is to ask, to really check your motives. This to me is one of the most diagnostic questions that helps me. I call this the QBQ, the question before the question. The question I ask myself before it comes out of my mouth. And that's this: what is my motive? What is my motive? Is my motive to sound impressive? Is it to be demeaning? Is it to try to be sarcastic? Or is it try to affirm? Am I curious? Am I trying to learn information? Am I trying to make a point? If you can ask yourself, what is my motive? That will help you immensely and may even save you from saying things or asking something that would be inappropriate, harmful, or potentially awkward. And the last one is play the questions game with yourself. I'm going to be really vulnerable with you right now and admit something publicly I have not shared with many people. When I'm in a conversation with people, I play a game with myself, no one else, just myself, called the questions game. And it goes like this: can I ask a question where somebody says back to me, huh, that's a really good question? Or, I've never thought about that before. Or, wow, ooh, give me a minute. I got to think about that. And in my head, I do this: yes. And I give myself 1 point. Now, here's the thing. You don't tell anybody that because not only would that be creepy and weird, it would also look contrived. I'm not trying to have a contrived conversation, but I'm trying to force myself to ask better questions. So when someone says, "Ooh, that's a really good question," or, I've never been asked that, I go, "Yes, 1 point for Briggs." It's a small way, but I'm always trying to push myself to be better when it comes to asking questions. So play the questions game with yourself. See if you can, how many points you can get, and don't tell the person you're in a conversation with that you're doing it. The third thing is afterwards, what I call reflection. So we have preparation and then we have participation. Now we have reflection. It's really important when you have a conversation or a meeting or whatever it might be to be able to reflect back on the questions that we asked and to simply ask, what questions did I ask today? Did I ask any good ones? Did I ask any important ones? What level were the questions that I asked? Can I identify them? I think that's a really important thing. And to say, were those good questions? Were they bad questions? Or were they good questions? Or were they great questions? And even to ask, how could I have asked that even better? So I asked a good question. If I improved that by just 10%, what would be a more thoughtful question? So instead of like, how you doing? Kind of a bland question. A better question might be, tell me, what's been the most interesting part of your day so far? Or instead of, what are you doing this weekend? Pretty common question to ask, what are you looking forward to most this weekend? And are you doing anything this weekend that you've never done before? Right? It's just a little bit sharper, a little bit more focused, a little bit more thoughtful, because if you ask good questions, it leads to really good conversations. Here's the secret of questions. If you ask generic questions, you're going to get generic responses. So how'd I do? Oh, pretty good. Or, I'm really trying to do better at my presentation. In the first 5 minutes of my introduction, what are things I did really well? Oh, man, that opening story you told was really funny and engaging. You see the difference there? So if you want good feedback, don't say, what'd you think? Say, hey, if I could improve this talk by 10% and do it better if I were to give it a month from now, what would two things be that I could make it 10% better? You're going to get some better feedback when you do something like that. And that's the second one. Ask others for feedback. You can reflect on your own questions, think about other people's feedback. And I love doing this. If you're a follower of Jesus, get a red letter edition of the Bible. Circle all the red question marks because the words of Jesus are in red, and just circle the question marks. Ask, how many did he ask? Where did Jesus ask these questions? Of whom did he ask the questions? And what was the impact or the effect or the life change that happened as a result of the questions he asked? This was a deep dive on my dissertation. It was just focusing on those questions of Jesus and trying to answer those. Just be aware of how many questions he asked. That's a future webinar we're thinking about offering, is the questions that God asked, the questions that Jesus asked, and what we can learn from Jesus as the master question asker. So if you're interested in joining us for that, I'd love to have you join me for that. So you see if you can use a red letter edition. Quite simply, the reason why we want to get better at this is this. If you change your questions, you'll change your life. Now, I don't mean to sound like a motivational speaker here. I'm not trying to be Tony Robbins today, but it's true. If you change the types of questions, the quality of the questions, you will change the quality of your life and the quality of other people's lives too. You work on this, you get better at asking questions. You ask God to help you to be a better question asker, something I do regularly. I invite you to do the same. And you'll hear people come up to you and say, I feel really loved and valued and respected and cared for because of the questions that you ask me. That is a beautiful gift. And press into that. See if you can care for people really well by the questions that you ask. Because if you change your questions, you will change your life and the lives of other people. It's a mindset shift. So you're going to give you an example. You change your question. One question could be when a difficult thing happens to you, or there's pain or struggle, or you lose your job, or you have a terrible medical report from the doctor. You think, why did this happen to me? That's a common question. But what if you shifted it to say, huh, this is really hard, but I wonder what I can learn from this? Or how is this an invitation or an opportunity for me to deepen my faith, even in the midst of this difficulty? You change your questions, you change your life. Or instead of thinking about somebody, why would they believe that? Or how in the world could they vote that way? To actually shift the question to say, huh, I wonder what led them to that conclusion. I wonder what things happen in their lives, some life experiences of that led them to carry that political conviction. Now, some of you are absolutely aware that I love questions. I mentioned I wrote my dissertation on that, and I've got a book coming out. And the book coming out is called The Art of Asking Better Questions. And in just a minute, we're going to have a discussion here. In the book, I give several more in each of the categories of preparation, participation, and reflection. I'm just giving you just three in each category, but I've got an entire chapter of each that can give really ridiculously practical ways that you can improve that. And so here's what I want to encourage you to do. I'm going to scroll back here real quickly, and then we're going to have some discussion on the questions that you have. So I want you to think through of the 9 suggestions, can you pick one, three in each of the categories? Sorry, one in each of the 3 categories. So you end up with 3 things that you could practice. So from this list of preparation, what is one thing that you can begin to practice starting this week? All right. And then this week, what is one thing you can do real time when you're in a conversation with someone? Think about one of these 3, which you may be able to try. And then think about one of these as far as reflection. Which one may you want to participate in as a possibility? All right. And let me encourage you, write it down. You can put it in the chat box, write it in your notes, put it on a Google Doc. But I want to encourage you to write down what are the 3 things that you can do starting today, right as soon as we log off this call here in 13 minutes. What can you begin to do? All right. I want to allow some time for some interaction around some questions that you may have. And so, again, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll let you weigh in on that. And so let's have some discussion. So, Dustin, I'm going to kick it back over to you about some of those questions.
All right. So we got a lot of great questions. I'm just going to pick a few of those. Maybe a good one to start. Chris Moore asked, what spark conversation question made you want to ask better questions and go on this journey?
A great question. Thanks, Chris. And 1 point for you if you're playing the questions game. That's a great question. Fortunately, it was really modeled well for me by my dad. I'm really grateful because I had a good model. And I always found it interesting when we would drive around in the car. My dad would just want to ask very thoughtful questions about what I thought and what I'm feeling, more than like, how's school? But of saying, what did you find most interesting at school today? Or when's the last time that you felt really scared at school? Or, man, if you were in charge of the school, what's one thing you would do to improve the opportunity for you and your friends to be better students in the school? And I remember it just opened up greater conversation. And I also began to notice other people who didn't ask questions. If I can be honest, they kind of had pretty uninteresting lives. And I found myself gravitating toward those who were more interesting and realized that they asked more questions. They were curious more often. And because of that, I thought, life's a lot better. The food of life tastes a lot better when it's sprinkled in with really thoughtful questions. So, Chris, I'm really grateful it was modeled well by my father. And so had that, and I know not everybody has that great example. And that's actually one of the reasons why I dedicated the book to my dad, because he's the one that taught me that. So,
Awesome. All right. Next one from Debbie McDowell. How do you ask the questions without making them sound rehearsed or like you are an interviewer?
yeah, it's great. That's great. Debbie, I have made some mistakes in my life where I'm really curious, sometimes too curious, and I'll ask someone a question and then another question because I'm interested. And I don't realize that they're kind of like, oh, and I wrote about it in the book about a time where I was just curious about what this guy, I was waiting at a gate to catch a flight, had some time to kill, and just asked this guy about his life and another question. And I don't think I was emotionally aware, relationally aware enough. Because after a while, he said, "Hey, are you a reporter?" And I said, "No." Why? Um, and he said, I feel like you're interviewing me or something. Like, is it okay if I just get back to reading my book? And so it takes a lot of emotional awareness and IQ to just realize that not every person wants to be asked questions, or not everybody wants to be asked questions right now. And so that's where the wisdom piece comes in, which I think is really important. It does take some practice, Debbie. I mean, I wouldn't recommend pulling out, an index card and being like, "Oh, excuse me here, let me ask you question number three on my list." And that feels robotic. But sometimes it's really fun. Uh, if you're taking some time and getting used to that, there's a little bit of like a question roulette where this has been a fun game. This is one of the suggestions in the book is list out 25 really good questions. And if you're with a group of people, to just say, "Hey, pick a number between 1 and 25." If they go number 17, you go, "Oh, let me pull this up on my phone. Question 17 is this. What do you all think about this?" And so sometimes you can say, "Hey, do you mind? I'm trying to ask better questions. Is it okay if I just read off a couple questions of things that I've been thinking through? And I'd love to get your thoughts on that." And if you tell people you're trying to learn and be better at that, I think people are understanding and want to help you get better at that as well. So it takes practice, Debbie. That's the nature of it. And again, what's our motive? Is it to ask a good question, or is it to care and to be curious? And if that's first, and then asking a better question is second, I think over time we're going to improve in that. That's a good question.
All right. A couple people asked a version of this question, coming from Christina. Can you provide an example of one of the questions you've heard and written down?
Yeah, sure. So the one last week, a guy was talking about affirmation in the book that I was reading. And he said, when you notice somebody doing something really well, they're really gifted at something, he said, ask the question, how'd you get so good at that? Now, it's a question, but it's also a way of affirming, man, you're really good at that. How'd you get so good at that? And I've been thinking about that a great deal, and how affirming that would be if someone asked me that. How'd you get so good at that? Huh. And you asked that, and I've asked a couple questions, a couple people that question, and that's been one I wrote down last week, and it's just been a really thoughtful engagement for me, and then great seasoned conversation with others. So, but I'd also love in the chat box if there's some really good questions you all have heard recently, write those down. I'd love to see those and learn from you all as well.
All right. Great. Next question. This is from an anonymous person. How do you cultivate curiosity in a community, especially when apathy is pretty common?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have actually spent a lot of time with groups where I've noticed that I've actually prayed for it. I don't always tell people that I'm praying for that, but of just saying like, "Lord, I really long for there to be curiosity with me and with other people." So prayer is number one. Number two is modeling that. And I think in modeling that by saying, I'm curious about, or I wonder if, and I find those two prefixes are really, really helpful to start sentences. Two really good prompts. The other one too is to encourage people to say, let's finish the sentence here. For 5 minutes, we're going to do an exercise as a team and say, I wonder about dot, dot, dot. Let's write them on the board. Let's say them out loud. Or what are we curious about? And let's just write all those on the board. So I think that can be helpful. But what's hard is you can cultivate curiosity by modeling it and valuing it and celebrating it when you see it, but you can't force people to be curious. You yourself can have the intrinsic motivation to always have a posture of humble learning and say, I wonder about that and I want to learn and grow. But we can't force anybody. But I think we can cultivate the conditions and the pH of the soil within our culture that I think can be helpful. Good question.
All right. Question that just came in. What is the role of questions in your relationship with God? This is from another anonymous person.
Oh man, that we probably that'll be in the next webinar that we do. because we're going to talk about that. But incredibly helpful. I'll say this very briefly. Um, I used to, when I pray, give lots of answers, and I've noticed over the last 5 to 10 years that I'm actually asking God more questions in my prayer. And a lot of that is because I'm seeing the permission that's given in the book of Psalms, the Psalms. The Psalms are really great, and they're full of a lot of level 3 and level 4 questions. In fact, some of them are pretty rated R questions. And one of the things that's fascinating is there are a lot of, in this public book of the Psalms, lots of rated R questions. And yet, God doesn't get angry. God values the fact that, hey, I'm so glad you're asking these raw questions. And so, just the permission that the Psalms give to me to ask better questions and raw questions and honest questions, it doesn't make God mad. I think he's grateful that at least I'm engaging with him on that and he's not scared away by it. So, yeah, I'm going to put a pin in that one, Dustin, because that's so good. That needs to be the next webinar when we talk about the questions of God, the questions of Jesus, and how our relationship is enhanced when we ask Jesus questions too.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so possibly just one more here.
Okay.
Um, Two people asked a similar question. What happens when a continued one-way support responses turns into an interview instead of a genuine two-way conversation?
Yeah.
And someone similarly, what if you kind of continue to get the response, I don't know, or I'm not sure?
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, those are really good. I will say that there are times where I come home from a meeting or a lunch. This happened a handful of months ago, and I put this story in the book as well, where I left the lunch and I realized the entire lunch, there was this haunting, cold feeling that washed over me of realizing that entire lunch, that person didn't ask me a single question. And it's not a victim mentality. I'm not better than them, but I just remember wanting to be intentional and support, support response. And I realized that they answer all those, and never once did they turn it back around and say, "What about you? What do you think?" And that's tough. That's really tough. So there's a loneliness because it's just not common in our culture to engage in long-term caring support response. And so that's hard. Those are lonely. I have to just trust that's going to be a gift to them, and hopefully they know that I'm here and trustworthy. But I wish we had played a little bit of tennis. I was hitting the ball over to their side of the net, but they never hit it back over, and that's hard. But so that happens. There are times, and again, I have to be careful, check my motives and check the level of relationship with them. And sometimes I'll say, you know what? Um, I've been asking you a lot of questions. Let me take a bite of my meal, and I'm going to allow you a chance to ask me a question. Now, I want to do it in a way that's not, arrogant or manipulative, but say, hey, are there any questions you have you'd want to ask me? And I think that's a good question too, to just kind of encourage, hey, let's play tennis. Hit the ball back over to my side of the net here on that. So there's more I could say on that. It's a great question, but we probably should put a pin in that one. But if people say I don't know, that's tough. Then I'm asking a level 2 or 3 question, and then I try to backtrack to something to that's level 1 where they know, and they can't say I don't know. So if you say, you know, it could be, you know, ask, especially with kids, right? How was your day at school? It was fine. What'd you do? Nothing, right? That's where I try to ask a question that is more than a one-word response from them. Like, um, hey, what was the most interesting class you took today? Tell me about one interaction you had with a friend, even if it was short. They can't answer that. I don't know. Or, yeah, good, great, fine. That they've got to engage with that further. And so that can be helpful too. So, yeah, there's more I could say, but let me just finish with this, and I'll kick it back over to you, Dustin. Earlier, I mentioned, um, that I'm writing this book, and I've written this book, and it's coming out. This is the first time I've ever shared the cover. I've shared the title, but here's the cover. Just came out, University Press. The cover has just been released, and it'll be out coming end of August, beginning of September. And so, one of the things I'd love to do is ask you a direct question. Will you help me? And if you don't, that's fine. But I'm looking for people that will help me be on a book launch team. And I could totally use your help. And if you'd like to help, just take your phone, click this QR code, I want to encourage you if you would take 44 seconds to fill out a form of just your name, your email address, your phone number. If you'd be willing, when the book is about to come out, to share it on social media, to provide an honest review on Goodreads or on Amazon, and to be willing to tell other people. If you're a part of the book launch team, I'm able to give you a couple sample chapters for free that won't be available to the public before it's released, and give you some bonus resources that are not included in the book. So if you'd like to do that, if you could just take 44 seconds right now to do that, that would be awesome. I do need some help and would love to share some of the book with you if you can help me get the word out about the power of questions on this. Um, the other thing too, I want to encourage you, reach out to me. Here's my email address. Would love to interact with you. So if you have additional questions and want to interact, I would love to be able to do that with you. And as Dustin is our director of coaching experience, but one of the things, we love coaching. And what is coaching? It's not telling people what to do. It's asking really good questions. And if you're a leader longing for people to ask you really thoughtful, good questions, that's one of the things our team does really well. Our team of coaches is they've been trained in this stuff to be able to ask better questions. So if you want the right questions being asked by the right people in and about your leadership context to provide greater clarity and perspective, we'd be glad to help. But this has been such a joy. I knew the hour would go quickly. I'm going to send it back to Dustin, but thank you everybody for being a part of this. And if you'd like to be a part of future ones, I'd love to do that for you. So thanks, Dustin.
All right. Well, I'll just say thank you again for everybody that joined. We will be sending out a follow-up email that will give you, I think, the access to the slides and potentially even the recording. So we'd be happy to resource you there. Just give a quick way to stay in touch with us. JR writes a newsletter every Tuesday morning, and he handwrites that. Very short read, very impactful. I encourage you to sign up for that. It's called 5 Things in 5 Minutes. And then lastly, if you do want to jump into coaching, just to start the process, we do a free exploratory call. You can just reach out to me and I can get you set up with that. I know a lot of you here on this call are in a coaching relationship already, which we appreciate. And yeah, if you're not and interested in getting involved, we would love to dive into that. So I know it's just after 2, so we want to wrap up. Thank you again. Hope you all have a great afternoon.